Hello, everyone. I'm back again. Luke Renda here with Matt Presti for another episode. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm good, Luke. Pleasure to join you once again.
Yes, it's been pretty fun doing this with you. So I think we'll keep her going here until we run out of stuff to talk about.
Could be a quite a long series,
Yeah, might keep going for a while. Yeah, that's right.
right?
Today I thought we'd focus a little bit on the science of Walter Russell. I have a few questions to ask you later on, but we can just get going on the current slides and see where that takes us.
Sounds good.
I wanted you to kind of comment on this slide from last week because we didn't quite touch on it. We got it in right at the end there. So let's see what you think about it. The law of balance can be expressed as the equilibrium between the opposites of duality, the centeredness of the oneness of the self.
Yeah, that's a great slide. Again, that's as Russell-esque as it gets. You know, it's just more or less taking things that he said and putting it into my own expression, but it all means the same. Basically, a duality to exist must move upon something that doesn't. And really, philosophy could use a new branch of what's called meta science, which is the science of science itself, as opposed to the metaphysical. And within that branch of meta science could be another branch called triality or trialism, meaning the study of three things, as opposed to dualism, which is the study of opposites. Because really a triality is what we're in. Again, I can open my door and you can see the door open and close, but nobody ever notices what part of the door isn't moving, which is the door jamb, you know, and there's nothing that moves in this universe that isn't moving upon something that doesn't move. And so there again, triality is paramount, and there's no branch of metaphysics or philosophy that deals with it. There's monism, there's dualism, you know, Cartesian dualism, there's all these isms of different sorts, but no trialism that I've ever seen. So interestingly enough, I've been going back over the branches of philosophy, and I find that really his philosophy encompasses all five of the main branches. And, you know, aesthetics, metaphysicality, logic, you know, these are, and ethics, you know, these are all parts of the Russell philosophy. So he kind of touches on each of these branches, which makes me wonder, again, why do we compartmentalize philosophy and specialize in different parts of philosophy as if they're separate from one another? Kind of like the physician, right? You've got these eye doctors, then you've got heart doctors, then you've got GI doctors and back doctors and foot doctors and eye, ear, nose, and throat specialists. But the doctors of old, the general practitioners, knew a general knowledge of all of these fields, encompassing a greater understanding of them all. And it was only when we began to subdivide everything into special categorizations that I think the left hand lost sight of what the right hand was doing, and the feet lost sight of what the eyes and the head were doing. And so you end up with, again, a compartmentalized view of not only the human body, but the philosophical mindset of the human being itself being divided into all these broken down branches that are all disconnected from one another. And then you have the gate guardians, those who specialize in one branch or another, who tell the other branches, you have no business coming around here. This is our territory, bug off. Mm-hmm. So I think we've done ourselves a great disservice in specializing in said branches. But I think, again, when you look at the overall, the triality nature of the universe, which is always three, you have that which does not move, and then you have polar opposites that move upon that fulcrum. And that's really what that slide is trying to pass along.
Yeah, that's excellent. I knew you were going to bring up the triality. I was trying to set you up there. I got a quote from you here, actually from the Crow Show, and it was the trialistic point of view with that point of view, you become master of duality rather than slave to it.
Yeah, that's pretty much touching right the nail on the head right there.
Yeah. Well, and I think the reason like it could have been a natural separation of those branches of philosophy, but I think they basically took out ethics and aesthetics. You know what I mean? They took out beauty and morality from their philosophy in order to sort of push this sort of materialistic, nihilistic point of view, I think, right?
Yeah, that's, get into existentialism and that the whole universe is meaningless, therefore you have to find some meaning in it. But, there's that, and then there's the extremes of these things. So I really try to avoid extremes because you spin off into dogma as opposed to being centered enough to decide for yourself, as opposed to falling into a belief system of us versus them, so to speak. And that's, how many things in our world are presented to us as all or nothing. You're either all Democrat or you're all Republican. Well, what about the middle? What about the people who subscribe to neither, but embody little bits of each, from a practical social standpoint versus a conservative standpoint? I think the best things tend to have parts of each other in them, sort of like nature. There's not much in nature that is solo in terms of barring everything else out for its own existence. Yet our epistemologies, our sciences, our knowledges, and things of that we study and compartmentalize into these different approaching avenues of thought and embodiment of consideration don't tend to allow others into their gate. It's academia has really become a box canyon of subdivisions, and over here's the Black neighborhood, over there's the white neighborhood, over there's the Latino neighborhood. Yet knowledge of this kind of sense is universal in that people should be studying and acquiring knowledge from different fields, different branches, and that's what I think in terms of a vocational interest. People who tend to find their own vocation will do this as well. They'll use and embody many different kinds of knowledge and fields of expertise to formulate their point of view for what their interest is. And that really, that's the gift of scholarship, really, is being led because of a vocation, a love for it, a loving of learning about a particular subject matter. And when you really love learning, you don't bar the gates as quickly. You consider alternatives, which only helps you hone in to a more precise expertise in the knowledge or the field that you're studying.
It's an actual philosophy, right? The love of wisdom.
Correct.
Not
right. It doesn't subjugate because, this particular field is on the wrong side of the tracks. Again, it's the optometrist or the oncologist, yet neither one knows anything about, and they have to refer, right? Well, if somebody knew a little bit of both, they could probably do a better job with a diagnosis.
More of a holistic knowledge.
Right. And that's what the RX in the pharmakia used to mean. It's related to astrology, which means, you have to have an understanding of a person's birth chart to be able to prescribe anything to them to begin with. Otherwise, you have no business doing that. And that's just, again, something we've lost sight of. That's hundreds of years old and was practiced for probably thousands of years since the times of the Hermetic Oath and things like that being introduced into the West.
And the RX is the Mercury symbol, right? The unifier of opposites. And so
Correct.
That's bringing that body back into balance again.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny talking about the compartmentalizing of this knowledge. It's like a cult. This is my knowledge here. This is your knowledge there. I think Michael Tessarian, he says it's like a pissing contest of knowledge. Like, they've pissed on that knowledge there, and that's
Right.
they've branded it theirs, right?
And the Hippocratic Oath is what? Do no harm. And what do we see being done the past 2 years in emergency rooms and hospitals around the world? Harm galore.
Yeah.
Right? They're murdering people left and right with these protocols that are government prescribed. That's not even a branch within medicine. Since when is government a branch of medicine?
Yeah.
What are they doing? Telling people how to treat their patients. And this is the major disconnect. This is why the authoritarian mindset was built to fail. That's how it was designed to fail. Because if it was designed to save lives, why isn't it doing that?
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is the problem with academia and the authoritarian mindset that academia drills into the heads of its followers. It is a cult because you're not allowed to go outside of it and think for yourself, or you get reprimanded, fired, laid off, put in intellectual prison. You lose your funding, and just the whole of it, the whole 9 yards, is designed to put people into an academic box canyon. And then the authoritarian mindset prevails in every instance. And look how hard, like, frontline doctors of America have had to fight just to have their opinions heard, based on real credible research. And it's not even allowed to be introduced into the prevailing medical journals, and then you have the Faucis and the Gateses of the world who are spearheading this disconnect from do no harm, right? It's all about harm, harming the food supply, harming the energy supply, harming everything, because they have a supreme hatred, not only for themselves, but for their fellow man. And it's apparent in the fruits that these people produce, which aren't fruits at all. It's rotted. So, I mean, we're going to have to deal with this one way or another. And we are dealing with it in real time. But I think, again, a more holistic approach to life is the antidote. Specialization in any field is more like limitation of every field.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very, very limiting point of view. And yeah, doctors now are politicians. Politicians now are medical experts. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. But I think it's pretty transparent too, when 180 something members of Congress were treated with ivermectin while simultaneously saying nobody else gets to be treated with ivermectin.
Yeah.
Don't listen to the horse conspiracy medicine theorists,
Yeah, that's
so
right.
it's just, it's really, again, like they demoted Pluto to not even being a planet, yet they're getting torn apart by it.
Yeah.
As Pluto pulls away the veil from the shenanigans going on behind the scene. Nobody's safe.
No, that's right. Isn't that so funny how they do that too, eh? Oh, it's not a planet now, right when it's making such a powerful impact on everyone's lives.
Right. Yep.
They just have to do it. It's a universal solvent, right? It's just breaking down everything that's false.
Yep. I think it was Tessarian that said, back in 2010 or so, that Pluto's return would be like going through the spin cycle in a washing machine.
Yeah.
But
I love that old documentary, The Architects of Control. And if you go back and watch it, he nails it. He basically talks about like the medical mafia back then and shows them for the murderers that they are.
Right.
He's absolutely on point. It's almost eerie to watch it now, actually.
The funny thing is, I haven't had health insurance for 22 years, but when I did, I was always seeing a doctor. So isn't that weird?
Well, look, here in Canada, it's free.
Right.
Which means it's really shitty. But people go all the time for everything.
Right.
It's insane. And here, there is no private practices. So these doctors are all following government protocol. Not a single one has a private practice where they can treat their patients as they wish. Again,
that's where the pursuit of a naturopathic doctor, or learning to be your own doctor, honestly, which is what I've done for myself. Some things I can't treat. A broken bone, of course, allopathic medicine has a great system of emergency protocol for such a thing. Car accident, things of that nature, stabilizing some kind of, But as far as my other personal health, if it's not something I can't do myself, I won't be seeking anyone else out to do it. I've actually read and learned, and my Lori, she's also a naturopathic doctor and a master herbalist. So, I mean, we've done a lot of this stuff on our own and care for ourselves. And I think there's something to be said for depending on yourself, but not to the point where you need a emergency medical procedure for like a broken hip, let's say, then it's probably best you see an allopathic doctor. Because again, it's not all bad in and of itself. It's just, what we've seen with COVID is a real example of how it can be misused.
Well, that's what they're good at, fixing broken bones. They get 1 star for that, but that's it. As far as keeping people healthy, it's, again, first, do no harm.
Yeah.
Every baby born, they're doing harm to right off the bat. That doctor should be losing his license right off the bat.
I think we're going to see a dramatic shift in people's trust of the pharmaceutical industry, as it should be, because for too many years, more than a century now, people have been subjected to this oil-based, petroleum-based treatment of human bodies, which, saw the end of the herbal systems of treatment for a more mechanized industrial approach to it. We have Rockefeller to thank for that, and others who funded medical research. And of course, David Whitehead's series on Cult of the Medics is extremely and highly informative for that. So recommend people check that out. But yeah, it's going to take a while to right this train to get it back on track. Might have to completely redesign it too, which is fine.
That's what we're going to have to do. That's why, again, it's that Buckminster Fuller approach of let's not spend so much time fighting against these people, and let's just build what we want to see coming out in the future, right? Spend our energy that way.
Atlas shrugged as well, let them do what they're going to do, but we're going to go do this without them.
Galt's Gulch. That's what we're creating, right? Galt's Gulch here.
We're going to build a world without them, and that's fine, because let them have their placid, fake, artificial AI world. I know the God of nature. I've experienced it directly and continue to, and it's my own consciousness stems from and returns to it on a daily basis with sleep and action, and just having that divine moment-to-moment awareness. You actually live in the real world. It is a real world out there. And it behooves anybody to get involved with it, to take part in it. Don't be a placid observer sitting on the sidelines waiting to dance. This is the one life you get to live, so make the best of it.
Spend more time doing those things that you want to do, right? Rather than this pursuit of some amorphous career or whatever in the future that maybe these degrees might get you, and on and on and on, right? It's like from day one, they kind of beat out the individual inside you that, and it's kind of coming back to that.
And Jung's Undiscovered Self, which you've spoken like 7 shows on with your cohort from Europe, if I'm right. That book says it all, man. And I'm just about finished with it. It's a short little read. I'm glad I started it just a few days ago. But I mean, you look at the people that show up outside of the Supreme Court justices' homes. I mean, this is exactly what he's talking about. Their entire identity, on the one hand, if you're in the far left, then you're fully under the control of the state. If you're in the far right, then you're fully under control of the religion authority, but each are equally as bad as the other and dehumanizing. And basically you lose identity with that center, which is the equilibrium, the unmovable, the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent force of consciousness, which is the creator God inside each and every one of us. We have the choice to co-create with it, or hang out on the wings like flappers and be pushed around by, the left devil on the shoulder or the right one on the shoulder. But there's a devil on each shoulder. There's an angel in the middle waiting for you to discover it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that that book, how he just drives home that, like, there are only individuals, right? The
Yeah.
individual is the only thing. It's like the group is just individuals, and we've got to realize that, right? People get led around and they lose their identity. And that's what also he says, like, masses are like this formless thing, and that's why they always have to choose a leader to give them some structure, right?
Mhm.
So the formless masses always choose a dictator.
Yeah. And it can be equated to a blob that slowly rolls over everything and completely absorbs it. Kind of like the Borg. The Borg is a perfect example. I can't believe that Star Trek got it so right, but then could get it so wrong on the same. It just bewilders me that you look at the Borg, the model of the Borg being a cube, right, moving through space. So cube is like the omnipresent form of the creator, uses the cube and the sphere. But that they chose the cube was an interesting thing to me. But ultimately, you will be assimilated. You don't have a right to individuality. And the way they destroyed the Borg was to train one of them to realize that he had his own name, hue, right? Meaning a shade of color, a hue, right? But when he realized he was hue and that's what they called him, and he began to get this sense of individuation from the collective, when they sent him back, they were in a moral dilemma. Well, we could destroy these people. And you've got your Captain Picard, he says, who cares? Look what they've done to us, right? But that's, again, that's an interesting parallel there. But the fact is that when they introduced this unique individual back into its collective, it ultimately destroyed the entire collective. And if only it was that simple, right? If you could just insert one person into Antifa and have the same effect, it would be a very good thing, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the problem with individuality. It's not something that can be programmed, because to program something is to collectivize it. So how do you you have to basically deprogram by refusing to be programmed in order to attain individuality. And that's the one tidbit they didn't put in that Next Generation episode.
Yeah, it's like talking with my 5-year-old son. He won't have any of it, what I'm laying down from. He's doing his own thing. It's so funny. And I'm like, God, he's just like, try and listen to me a little bit, or trying it. But it's like, that also, I'm like, oh, that's really good that he's just like, no, this is the way I'm doing it. I have my own individuality. And it's like, I'm trying to guide him a little bit, but it's pretty funny being the parent, walking that fine line of, trying to help them learn and understand, but not to force them in any one way,
Right. You got to allow for that healthy exploration, but be there, as Lori used to say this, we both had teenage sons that are now in their 20s. And every teenage boy goes through a rite of passage, and, it's upsetting to see some of the things they do to themselves. But she said it to this extent one time, and it really put it in perspective for me. She said, I'm going to give him enough rope to hang himself, but I'm going to be there to help him out of the noose so it doesn't kill him. And I just found that to be profound. I'm like, well, that's very interesting, because how does he learn if you keep saving him from himself? You have to allow them to get into bits of trouble or potential situations where a little pain might be the outcome. Now, I'm not saying, you want to see him surfing on top of a car at 40 miles an hour going down the street with his buddies. You probably should get involved at that point, because that's just stupid, right? But, and I've been there, man. I stood on top of a hood of a car, and for whatever reason at 16, I don't know what we were doing, thinking, but
yeah.
the kinds of things we go through. And yeah, that's good to be there for reminder as a guidepost. But again, I just really like that. Give them enough rope to hang themselves, but be there to help them out of the noose. Because then they're still experiencing life. They're learning these lessons for themselves, as opposed to being dictated to that they should learn them, which is not experience. It's more or less again, it's another kind of intellectual mindset forced upon somebody.
Yeah, that experience is exactly what you need to learn. You can tell someone till the cows come home, right? But they have to experience it themselves. And
Yep.
yeah, it's that fine line. It's funny trying to get through it. Being a parent right now, a young parent, it's like, okay, they got to learn it themselves, and sometimes I cringe and just let him do his thing, and he makes it out fine most of the time, right?
And an adaptation to the old saying is this: you can lead a horse to wisdom, but you can't make him think.
Yeah, that's right. Nice. I love it. Um, yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. It's so, yeah, it's difficult to be that in that position, right? I've already gone through a lot of it myself, and I probably should have been gentler on myself. But when these kids are at their young age, that's that prime learning time because they can't really hurt themselves as much. They're a little more bouncy, a little more, their bones are still forming. So like now is the time to teach them that caution and teach them how to balancing and all that type of stuff, right? Tossing and turning on the trampoline, punching each other, they can't hurt each other that bad. It's when you start getting older and you haven't learned those lessons when it becomes a real danger.
That's right. And this is Rudolf Steiner's model. You've the Montessori and others, you find what the kid is interested in and you provide the tools for them to develop that. So if it's art, if it's painting, if it's writing, if it's poetry, and unfortunately, the visual stimuli of video games is not in the same category as what I'm speaking of. And these things, again, we last episode, I think we talked about how these are the things that most of our hands spend time with doing this, right? As opposed to holding a paintbrush or a pen to write or a sculpting tool or gardening shears, doing something in the real world with your two hands that produces an aesthetic quality to your life, which is beauty, right? I mean, it's, I wouldn't say much from this ever that comes from this is beautiful. Yeah, it's nice to be able to communicate very quickly to your spouse. Hey, where are you at? I'm at the grocery store. Do you need anything? It's nice for kids because they communicate to each other. But where's the beauty? At what point does this thing make you feel like you would when you see the sunrise or watch the dawn break upon the world? I mean, that's what we're losing. We're losing that aesthetic quality, that connection to nature, because the AI world is artificial nature. To be quite honest, it's not even intelligent. It's only going to follow the parameters of the program that it was designed to follow, much like a collectivist. These are collective devices. And it's rare that anybody does anything very individualistic with it, other than communicating over text messages. The rest of it is pretty much standardized collective software of sorts. So you got to kind of purposely work to break away from it. Take a walk in nature from time to time. Listen, at least at the very least, when you open your window, try not to listen to the buses and the screaming and the sirens, but rather listen to nature. Try to catch the bird that's chirping, in a tree below you or wherever it might be. And you begin to focus on that song of nature, and that echoes in your soul, and it brings alive something in you that makes the cell phone look obsolete. And something the cell phone can never do is recreate nature. So that's why it's artificial, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, like Tolkien, he says that, the sound of the ocean and the waves was like the original song of the Ainur or whatever, which was like his song of God, basically.
Yep.
And it's like it's like that sound, like the wind blowing through the leaves, it's like it's gonna remind you of like who you are and where you come from. And
there's the hard note of the crashing wave, and the soft note of the receding wave. And then there's the silence in between each of those opposites. And as Beethoven would say, God is in the silence between the notes, right? So,
well, and that's where everything springs from, right?
right.
That sound.
How can you have dualism if you don't have something for dualism to extend out of and return to?
so crazy, eh? It's like, how do people miss this? It's wild, right?
Because it's not moving. It doesn't respond to your senses. Knowledge isn't something you can hold in your hand. That's why we're saying all the books in the library are meaningless. There's no knowledge in them. The knowledge is ethereal. It's of a mental quality or a spiritual quality, to be quite honest. And you can have all the books in the world in your house and still know nothing, right? We touched on that too with Twain and Jefferson, mentioning the man who reads the newspaper. But yeah, so really it just, it's, again, it's what perspective do you want to take? And it's acknowledging the immovable, which is within each and every one of us, which just happens to be center of two opposing hemispheres of equal and opposite, right? If that's not a dualism, but what's between the hands? See that? There's nothing there, but there's something still there. So we have polar opposite hemispheres, which all grow, if you follow the petri dish of the growth of a human being, from the very smallest to its full form at birth, even to old age, you'll see that all the organs, all the limbs, everything extends from a central place. Out of seemingly nothing, here comes this perfectly formed hemispheric being that is in divine proportion. But everybody thinks that, in material science, that this is all informed by DNA, or it's informed by existent structure and existent matter, when actually it's the mind that informs the dualism and its growth stages. Just like in a planet, you have north and south hemispheres, and pretty much in anything, you can see that there's a central equilibrium from which all this stuff unfolds and returns to. It's the blueprint of how nature operates.
Well, and the power of mind, that's something that's why that mind control is so important.
Absolutely. You don't have to control bodies. You don't have to physically put people in cages if you can control their minds. Yeah. That's always been the goal. And when they can't do that, then they just bring the slaughter tanks out and the Iron Mans and all the boxes with the spikes and the guillotines and everything else. When they can't control the mind and the mind rebels, and it's not necessarily healthy for people to rebel in a collective way either, because you're going to end up burning everything down, right? Look at the 20s, the riots in 2020 in Detroit and other places, and Milwaukee and wherever else, Kenosha. It's just, this is what the end result of collectivism is. There's a great movie from the 20s, I believe, called The Good Earth. And it's about the Chinese Civil War, basically, that happened in, I believe it's the 1800s. There was a lot of turmoil and plague and famine and drought and things of that nature. And it just shows, it was one of the best scenes that showed how a mob can destroy stuff. And it got crapped on. The movie got shit on, especially as of late by leftist blue-haired fact checkers, because it was all white people portraying Chinese people. And so that's a no-no, even though back then Hollywood had really no base of Chinese actors for which to use. But anyways, it's still a good movie nonetheless, for the perspective that it offers on how a mob can go awry very quickly.
Well, it's that high vibration. I've heard you say that before, right? Like an earthquake's a high vibration, a mob in a riot is a high vibration. It's that stillness is where we need to operate from.
Right. And the best fighters operate from their equilibrium, not from the seesaw. That's why they kick ass and they can exert force that's unmatched, unparalleled. I've seen the littlest guy throw a 250-pound guy across a room.
Yeah.
And he calls it chi. So what is chi? And he says chi is here. So what is chi? Does anybody even care? Is it something that moves in dualistic nature? No, it's not. It's the still mind from within that is the power source. It is the well, the deep well of still water, as Dr. Russell called it. And you can pump it out and put it into action. You can put it to work and make it do things. And the more you can tap that well, the more you can do. And
Yeah.
that's the simple fact of the matter. It's not that I was born gifted or this guy was born gifted. It's the realization of the power within oneself that denotes whether or not one can use that power. If you don't realize you have the power and you're giving your power away to Antifa or BLM or any other collectivist group, what's going to be your fruit? Is it going to be the centered thought and idea of somebody else that you're adhering to, a master? Yeah, of course, it's going to be a master slave dynamic, and destruction will be the lot of it. It'll be the fruit of it. But one who realizes their innate and divine mind power that dwells within each and every human being, the more you become aware of that mind power, the more you can use it to affect real change and to crystallize your thoughts into form, to build bodies for your own ideas.
Mhm.
And that's really what the philosophy of the Russells teaches.
And that's how this whole project for me came about, this whole channel and everything. I was like, had this idea a few years back, and it took all of these sequential steps to get it into building that body for it.
Mhm.
But that was the power of mind, right? That mind, and your mind will create reality. But we're constantly
Absolutely.
told that no, it's this, it's that, it's these other factors. And that's why that usurping of our mind is such a powerful tool for them. And
Yep.
even with martial arts, like that balance point, if I am like slightly, like the tiniest bit out of balance, my opponent will actually just take advantage of that, especially
Sure.
if it's a black belt or someone like that. Like I could be a little bit leaning forward or a little bit leaning back, and then I'm going way back or way forward, because they just capitalize on the unbalance of the opponent.
And that's why the term divide and conquer. I mean, if you're not divided, you're not penetrable. You're impenetrable. If you're whole, if your hemispheres are united and you lead yourself and move your body purposefully according to the dictates of your intent and not any other, you're impenetrable. You're like you're untouchable in a sense. And so it's always a conviction of theirs to keep people out of balance by either creating things that create unbalance. This is all they're good at, and that's all they've ever been good at.
Yeah.
And if they were any good at unifying humanity, we would see it on the world stage. We would see coherence, we would see harmony, we would see balance like works in nature, and we would probably be exploring other galaxies by this point. But unfortunately, this apid, primitive, primate-like mindset of the modern day psychopath hasn't changed in 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. And I'm not convinced that, in fact, I tend to lean toward this, that of the 28 civilizations that have existed on this planet, it's these very psychopaths that drive it down into the ground and cause that civilization to go into what is called a period of a dark age. And the only way to escape the dark age, and the Russells put it very succinctly, is to maintain continuity the way nature does. In other words, to exhibit balance between all pairs of opposites, between men and women, between rulers and subjects, between capital and labor, between whatever it is. If there's a healthy balance there, you're going to have continuity. But unfortunately, as does Rise, strong men make for good times, weak men, good times make for weak men make for bad times or hard times. And that's because there's no consistency. People don't understand the value of continuity in day-to-day life. And so they get lazy, they get used to things, they become apathetic, and uninvolved. And is it any wonder when people become uninvolved and apathetic that these kinds of psychopathic mindsets should move in to positions of power and take over? So as much as it's well coordinated, it's also, I'd say even more, the majority fault of individuals who acquiesce into states of apathy over generations. There's not that strong installation of family values, and there's no edification of the youth to embrace morality and ethics and and virtues. So we get what we deserve in a sense.
Well, and it's a constant thing. It's not like, oh, we've defeated evil, now we can all relax forever. It's like we have to teach the children to be able to pick it out right away. Because the only thing so I always say that these people don't create anything, but you brought up a good point. The only thing they do create is division. That's the only thing they create.
It's what they're best at, in my opinion. And, you know, looking out at the world, everywhere people are divided against this and that. And though I do see some unification becoming more and more in terms of political awareness, because people are realizing how bad they're getting screwed over right now, especially moms who can't find baby formula and truckers who are paying almost $7 a gallon for diesel fuel, which is just going to, you know, call it the Great Reset, call it what you want, but the harder it gets, the more we're going to be able to do something about it, because that hard times create strong men, right? So, you know, something about the human being, you know, is infallible, and that's its ability to become necessary for its own survival. Mm-hmm. Right now, this seemingly external things are necessary to us. What's the next binge watch we're going to do? What's for dinner? What's, you know, when can I get a new car? How can I, you know, but when we become necessary for our own survival, when we actually have to start taking apart, getting our hands into the soil and growing crops because there's no food at the supermarkets, I think we're going to see a quick and rapid change in the way humanity operates. And I don't think it's going to be a walk through the park. You know, it could result in the deaths of millions, but it's not like everybody didn't have the opportunity to become aware of all this that's been going on for the past, you know, this decay, this rot has been happening over decades. And so those who had the foresight to be aware of it and to do the necessary work to become self-dependent and independent, because the more self-dependent you become, the more independent you become, because the self is inward, right? So independence is self-dependence, just two ways of putting it. And ultimately, you want to form alliances with other self-dependent, independent people. And those are the ones that are going to be able to keep trade alive, you know, to grow certain things, then trade with the others who might grow, who might do farming of animals and things of that nature. We're going to see the barter system come back. We're going to have to, otherwise there will be severe shortages, the likes of which no one's ever seen. And I think Argentina is a great example for that. When their economy tanked back in the, I can't remember the exact years, but when it tanked and their currency went to shit, and you couldn't get a loaf of bread for less than, I don't know, however, 30,000 of their currency, whatever it was. So what did the people do? They had two choices: starve to death or figure out a way to survive. They began, and thanks largely in part to the women of that country as well, they simply tapped into something that was in the genetic memory, which was bartering and trading, and they managed to survive. So yeah, I mean, there may be hard times coming, but I think when the human being becomes necessary to its own survival, then we'll begin to see what they call the father of all invention, which is spurned on by necessity.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's that another thing that you said on Crow was, when character becomes currency, we won't need money anymore. And that's that barter system, right? It's like, I will barter with you. I know you're going to do this service for me. I'll do that for you. I'm already doing it with my neighbors now. And just getting that ball rolling, and people you can trust. And, you know, it's like, I did a bunch of pruning for my ex-brother-in-law there, and he's going to come over and do machine work. And now it's like, I don't even keep track of my hours. It's like, I did, you know, these 3 trees for you. It was like a dozen hours or whatever, you know, you do whatever you think is fair over here for me. And that's that thing. And it's the same almost with like labor unions and all that stuff. It's like, when did we lose this dialogue of talking with the person you're working for to make it fair?
Right.
Like,
right.
That's all it
really,
is.
That's really RBI, rhythmic balanced interchange. I mean, are you getting equal balance for the work you do? And is it an interchangeable thing that creates more sequences of the same?
Mhm.
So it's very simple. It's Russell's law of balance, the one law of balance.
Mhm.
And so I think in every art form, in every martial art form, in every sport, in gymnastics, in tennis, and you name the sport, you name whatever art form there is, if you have balance in your exhibition of the knowledge that you possess to perform the said art, you will create, you will create rhythmic interchange. So balance is the imperative. And if you got a guy comes over to do a repair, let's say, and he's out of balance, he's on drugs, or he's, let's say checking your wife out when he's supposed to be fixing the washer,
Yeah.
you're immediately going to know this guy's out of balance. So, at that point, if a balanced individual goes, sir, you need to leave, you know, I'll call a different company because I don't like the vibe that you're bringing off. You don't have balance. You don't even have the right tools for the job I hired you for, so, but you'll know balance when you see it because it's reciprocal. It gives you that which you give back to it and vice versa. It creates the interchange and perpetuates the interchange without debits or credits. It's equal work for equal pay kind of thing.
Mhm.
But work is defined as many things. Work could be an artwork or a work of competitive sports or a work of martial arts or any of those things. So business, business transaction, you buy a lemon from a car dealer, you're going to feel robbed and you're not going to have a good review and it's not going to go well. So again, there's the rhythmic balance interchange principle is the one principle that Russell noticed because of his divine illumination. He was specifically told there's one law of my universe, and that is the law of balance. And that is really the thing that's the very acknowledgement and the teaching of that as a fundamental principle of human life will be what staves off the collapse of civilizations in the future. Because like nature, if man can hold continuity in his thinking and his interchanges, we won't see this rise and fall of civilizations. We can actually, and I believe this is absolutely possible because one can do it in their own life as a valid test of whether it works. I could care less if the whole world around me collapses. My life, I've worked so hard to attain that balance and exert that balance in my life that it's enough for me to know that it is possible. And I do know that if I can do it, anyone can. And if we all did achieve balance within our own lives and rhythmic balance interchange between all opposites, be it your neighbor, your coworkers, whoever, then we would have much better chance at having continuity in a civilization as opposed to seeing this rise and fall. And that's one of the great subjects the Russells dealt with is it wasn't enough to know the cause of collapse of a civilization, but it was more important to know how it can be made to last as opposed to collapse, and what is the solution to collapsing civilizations, 28 of which we've seen historically over the past 7,000-8,000 years.
Well, and that's what sort of transformed for me from being like an angry teen to, hey, like you're the one that can change your life. And that's it. And if you can do that in your life, other people can do it. You can't change other people. That's like obviously the downfall of like Antifa, BLM, whatever, is like they see an imbalance and then they go like, we're gonna like beat this thing back into balance, but it just creates more imbalance. What they don't realize is they gotta find, and again, the word is balance. Every time you do something, just think balance. Where can I find that center point, right?
Yeah, they're getting played too because the powers that never were are channeling them into these places because it takes an unbalanced person to be part of such a thing.
Yeah, and
There's
everyone
no
I've talked to,
balanced people in those kinds of organizations. They wouldn't hear of it. They wouldn't have it.
of course not. But the thing is, Tessarian always brought up that quote, I think was Kierkegaard. It's not, have I been sold a lie, but have I bought one? Right? It puts that onus on you.
Yeah.
It's like you bought the lie. No one
There's
forced
lots of
you.
people selling bullshit, but you got to be a buyer to, take part in it.
And that's kind of,
Well said.
getting back to that center point. And
Mhm.
Even when I was doing like boxing and stuff like that, every time I'd step into the ring, everyone was bigger than me, but I would have a calm demeanor. And, one of my friends was like, wow, you got real balls. Like every time they call your name to go in the ring, you just get your gloves on, you go in. And, like obviously I just stayed calm. It's like, okay, I'm going to stay calm. Even if I go in and get my ass kicked by this huge logger or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? I'm going to go in, I'm going to try and stay calm, stay balanced. And Bruce Lee always said, like, if you're worried about the outcome, you're going to lose. If you're worried about winning or losing, you won't win. You just got to go in, you've done your training, stay balanced, and the outcome will be whatever it's going to be.
Yep.
It's really interesting. Just like, just stay calm, stay balanced. Everyone is out here and out there, on the edges, and it's bringing that back into the center. It will change your life.
Absolutely. The beauty of that in martial arts is they tell you that it's basically being in the now is also in sports known as being in the zone.
Yeah.
And you're so much more capable to deal with any kind of things that should happen, especially in emergency situations. Again, being a volunteer firefighter, there's rapid decisions you have to make, and you don't have any time to think about it, like to weigh it out over 3 or 4 minutes, in most cases. Let's just say it's why they're called first responders. But emergency situations require a certain knowledge that training can give you to a degree, but at some point you have to go with what you feel is going to work as well and form an adequate response. So in any situation, the more in the now and the moment you are, the more responsive you can be. Where I think if you're emotionally bound in one hemisphere or the other, in stuck in your dualism of polar opposites, you're going to think that, oh man, I should smash the crap out of this because I'm reacting to it as opposed to responding to it. So I think, again, it's just that being centered, because, and you can be in any situation. It doesn't necessarily even have to be fight or flight as much as it is be in the light of that moment. And then you can decide which one is best. Maybe it is better that you run because a propane tank's going to blow up as opposed to standing there trying to fight it with a hose. Whatever the case may be, there's always the still small voice inside that guides man and never lies. It never deceives. It's always true because it's the voice of reason. It's the voice of consciousness. It's the still small voice. It's the conscious itself, which is the creator. And it is lightning information that can lead a person to make the right decision over and over and over. And it's to be relied on, not to be ignored. Or, a lot of people say, oh, what do you have, a voice in your head? Well, we all do. The question is, do you listen to it or not? Are you going to be sold a lie, or are you going to buy one? Right. So.
Well, that's where that foundation that you can always come back to. I told my wife that about the First Reactor. She's been a first responder for over half her life.
Oh, cool.
Paramedic and fire. She was fire sciences. That's what she took. And then she was a paramedic for about 5 years.
Well, tell her I said thanks for her service.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, but she said, like, you can see people's face at a fire or something, right? And it's like, that guy's got to get out of here. Right. Because you can tell he's reacting to that situation. It's not only going to be a danger to himself, but everyone else around them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, the guys in the military I've known, if you had one of these goons from one of these protests, that they would put that person down to save the rest of the squad.
Yeah.
Because they would bring great danger and possible death to the mission. So, I mean, there's just the fact that, it's the strangest thing to see, because it's such a paradox to watch that, this is such a small fringe too, but it's given such media attention that you would think it's enormous, but it's not really as big of a monster as they like to make it look. In fact, it's very fringe, less than 0.001%. of the population are in these kinds of actual physical movements that go out and burn things down and take part in this mob mentality. So I think a lot of the mind control is the illusion that this darkness has more power than it does. It has to display that in order to keep the rest of the people in fear, in a state of passive acquiescence and a state of non-resistance. But those times are waning. And I think the more people become their own media, which I've been saying since 2011, I decided I was 10 when I started my exploration of consciousness. I desired to become my own media. And I think that's a great solution for where we're at, because we have just as much right to inform ourselves as they have to inform what they think they're informing, which is the rest of the world, which is really beginning to tune them all out. And soon it'll be an echo chamber that only their own voice resigns in their own media acolyte, Plato's cave of mediocrity. And that's where they should end up, because they've dug their own hole. It's time they sleep in it. But as for the rest of us, we have the absolute full right to inform ourselves, to listen to our own guiding light of consciousness within, to unfold the desires and the will power of the ideas that we have. An idea is nothing more than a seed. The question is, are you going to plant it and water it? And, the genius plants and waters many seeds in a lifetime, where mediocrity thinks about an idea, but never plants it, never waters it, and doesn't really have any desire to see it unfold. So therein is the solution, I say, to that would be, if children were taught at a young age the way mind really works, the way it really, truly, actually works, we would see a much different world unfold, because we're training children at a very young age to be able to apply the knowledge of knowing the process of mind itself. And I cover all that in my Knowing the Creator 101 series.
Well, even Dr. Bruce Lipton, he talks about like genetics and stuff like that. And he's like, the only reason something appears to be a genetic disease is because the kid does the same thing that the parents do, and has the same mindset that the parents do, and eats the same food that the parents do. There is no genetic diseases. We've created that for ourselves because we've kept in the same pattern as those who came before us, right? And I agree with you as well with, like, I feel like these people, it's an illusion of power. These people don't have any power at all. Everyone's worried about, like nanotechnology, laser beams from the sky, blah, blah, blah. It's like these people are putting on airs to keep us in control. They don't have any actual power. Like the land masses of the United States and Canada, it's like you'd have to have the most gigantic military ever to be able to patrol every little square inch of this place. It's just not possible. They have to get that fear mindset into you to keep you under control, right? They got to have that sheepdog nipping every once in a while at the sheep, but
right,
it's the goats up on the mountains looking down. They're like, hey, you could always come join us.
Yeah,
don't have to be down there.
I had a buddy a couple days ago. He said these people are so powerful they can kill anyone, anywhere, at any time, for any reason. And I said, but yeah, we can shoot back too.
Yeah.
What about that angle? Do you ever think of that angle? These people are not omnipotent. They're not the only source. They're not the only power, the only game in town. There are many uses of the light of mind. And I'll quote Dr. Russell, a man can kill another man by the sword, but by the sword ye killeth with, ye shall also be killed. So nature, not man, holds the right to the reaction. And if the naturalness of man reacts to this unnatural man that's trying to dominate the world right now, it's going to be harsh, and it's going to be exacting. It's going to be precise. That's why it hasn't happened yet. Resistance is not just suffering something. Resistance means a point of culmination where the inevitable pendulum swinging back takes place. And I'll just say this, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end, and there's a lot of places these people can't go in public, or they'd be stoned to death for the murderous rampages that they've caused across this planet, their spewing of lies and deceit, their disregard for basic human life, basic decency of their fellow man. These things aren't going to be easily forgiven or forgotten. And I just think to myself, man, I'm glad I picked a different path. You know, I could have been an evil prick if I wanted to be. Evil's an easy path. It's like, here, come here, temptation, you know, be a hedonist, fulfill the desires of your body, screw who it hurts. Don't worry if it messes somebody else's life up. It's your desires and only your pleasures that matter, you know? And I was on that path for my early 20s, as a lot of us were. You know, you get to that point in life, mine was 33, where I had my own come to Jesus moment, if you will. Jesus being the figurative light of truth inside yourself, which is either A, to be nourished, or B, to be starved to death. And why did the Masons pick 33 as the peak of their craft? Because you're frozen at 32 degrees, right? When you hit 33, you thaw out if you're lucky. I think that's the symbolicness of 33, 11 cycles, 3 cycles of 11. But basically, those who don't thaw out after 33, they remain frozen forever in their mindsets, you know. So maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know. A friend of mine mentioned that years ago to me, and I found it perplexing to think about. But 33 is a powerful year, and for a lot of different people, I've heard the same stories come from them. But ultimately, you have two choices in this life: lead yourself or be led by others. Now, you can take part in all kinds of collective things. A volunteer fire department is a collective endeavor, but it relies on well-informed individuals who can communicate to accomplish a task of either saving a life or property or something along those lines. So it does have its individual side, but it does have its collective. It's a nice balance, but it's not all or nothing in either case. You know, it's volunteer is not voluntold. So fortunately, you know, when you take part in an organization, you kind of meet really good people who also have the kind of morality that you do to want to help in the first place. So I've met some of the best people I met in my life are on the 2 volunteer fire departments I serve on. And, you know, there's nothing they wouldn't do for you. And none of them stop to ask, hey, are you liberal or conservative before we go into a house, right? Are you straight or gay? No, we don't stop to ask that. You know, there's a mission to accomplish, and that's to help either save life or save property or something in between that. And, you know, it's really just a great organization. And I recommend, if people, even if you don't want to serve as a volunteer firefighter, find something voluntary to do in your community that uplifts it, because that's what we need. Volunteerism is at an all-time low in the United States. I heard this in a fire class about 4 years ago, and it stuck with me. I'm like, well, you know, that's sad to hear that, but ultimately doing something with the community in that form of a collective level can be a very positive thing. So not all collectivity is negativity and Borgish. You know, some collective acts of kindness where people work together as a group, say, you know, for any of these different kinds of organizations, can be quite fulfilling and rewarding for the individuals that partake in it.
Well, that's what makes a community, is all these individuals that, you know, have some sort of a common goal and want to help each other.
Right.
It's not like a slave driven thing. It's that is in line with your goals as well.
Exactly.
Right. And
the benefits are always positive, you know,
helping people out. Yeah, it's great. Love it. Here, it's funny you actually brought up this quote a few minutes ago. It was the next slide we have. Okay. So let's check it out. Oh shit, what happened here?
There it is.
There we go. What's going on?
I see it.
Man's knowledge is like a deep well of still water. His thinking is like a two-way pump which divides the quality of that stillness into quantities of parts and sets them flowing. That is what the objective universe is, quantities of many seemingly separate forms of ideas, all of which are but parts of the one whole idea.
Yeah, that's a fascinating quote that he just, again, he's acknowledging the stillness in the center, the fulcrum. The fulcrum is the very word fulcrum is an incredible word, but it really, to me, it means power. You know, if you think of a great name for a heavy metal band would be Fulcrum, and I was going to name one of my projects that, and lo and behold, there's a heavy metal band named Fulcrum already. So you don't, if you're heavy metal, you're not, or if you're let's just say some kind of goofy bubblegum music band, you're not going to call yourself Fulcrum. Okay, it's going to be something cheesy. But anyways, the point of this is the power is in the center. All the power is there, you know, and it's the power of mind. Mind is the universal quotient, the universal equilibrium upon which all motions move. It's all, see, but motion itself is not consciousness. It's the expression of consciousness that has to divide into polar opposites to set up sequential interchanges and polarity, which results in motion and form and matter. But it's caused by mind, which is universally omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, all knowing, all present, and all powerful. Anywhere there's a motion in the universe of a planet, a star, a sun, an atom, an ant, a human, there is a fulcrum centering that being which does not move, and centering each and every cell of the composition of that being is a extended fulcrum from that source fulcrum itself. So all fulcrum is that which doesn't move, and you always find it because you find things that move on it, you know, and that's the beauty of it. And our senses aren't trained to look for what's not moving. It's only trained to notice what is moving.
Well, that's how the Russells sort of defined God, was as this mother, father, like this sexless, motionless, like still point from which everything else springs forth.
Yep.
And
And that also goes to say with life and death, and the Russells poo-pooed the idea of bodies running around in heaven after life. No, it's not how it works. It's much the same way when you lay down at night and you lose the sensation of your body. But you don't become, falling asleep does not mean you become unconscious. Consciousness is a very subtle thing. Okay, it's not loud and obnoxious going, hey, look at me, I'm here. It's very subtle. In fact, it's so subtle that it's barely noticeable. That's why people can't hear that still small voice. It takes training and many years of insightful recollection to get to notice that voice that is softly speaking to man. And so they poo-pooed on the idea of this bodies going to heaven. So you go to some place that's physical and you physically run around physical streets of gold, you know, gallivanting with your deceased loved ones going back generations. It's just ridiculous. Our concepts of motion, time, and the afterlife are really they're trivial, and they're immature, I'd say. But ultimately, when you come to understand the real scientific natural order and how motion unfolds from stillness and how sound unfolds from silence, and how all polar opposites in nature are the result of a division of an equilibrium, you'll realize that that omnipresent equilibrium is something that there's only but life in it, because that's the power source. And when you pass or refold, as the Russells call it, what does nature do? What do flowers do in trees? They unfold and refold from seed. Unfold from seed, refold back into seed. What do men do? They unfold from a sperm and an egg, and they refold their own sperm to then once again unite with an egg. I mean, we're as natural as it gets. That's all we got to do is line ourselves up to nature to see the commonality of the consistency and the endless repetitions of bodies in motion, which all of us are. But again, that timeless source within, there's no oak tree. If you cut a acorn in half and you look at it, you're not going to find, even with an electron microscope, you will find no 50-foot tall or 100-foot tall 50-ton oak tree anywhere in that acorn. Yet the idea of it is in there, because what does it become after 50 to 100 years? It becomes that very thing which you can envision. You can see what it's going to become, but there's no evidence of it for the senses. So again, knowledge being something that's not material is really the way to understand this. And there's all kinds of knowledge that people have that cannot be proven materially. So yet this scientific determinism of a materialist based only universe, again, the materialistic externalist must explain everything using material to explain it. There is no mind quotient in that equation, and that's doing a grave disservice to this field of the question of this field of epistemology. What is knowledge? What really is it? Where does it come from? And that's one of the great things about the Russell philosophy is it crosses so many branches of all these different philosophical dividends, if you will, or divided specialities. And it does do more to unify man's view of the universe than any philosophy I've read yet, which most of them are dead philosophies, but that's specifically why the Russell's called there's a living philosophy, because it does really entail so much about life and nature, the question of God and man and consciousness and all of it. All the questions from time immemorial are answered in their coursework.
Yeah, there is no death. I love that chapter. There is no death.
Incredible.
Reincarnation explained. Bruce Lipton actually goes into this in his biology of studying cells.
Yep.
And I think even on an Unslaved podcast, he brought it up way back, just like how he kind of explained how reincarnation works on a biological level. It was super interesting with the cells, like whatever is that unique frequency that you're operating from never dies. A new body is born that picks up on that frequency, and then your life just continues basically from there, from a new seed or whatever. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, the Russells go quite well into it as well, and the profound similarities between these great authors. Your Liptons, your even the Lao Tzus of the world, who have written these divine little manuscripts, but in them I cross-pollinated. I should say I found a cross-pollination between these different pursuits from different minds, but there's this golden thread that weaves them all together. You read Dr. Richard Murray Spuck's work, Cosmic Consciousness, where he goes into the 40 most illumined individuals that have ever walked the earth, and the profound crossover between just portions of their writing confirm a greater picture. This larger picture begins to emerge. Studies some 50 now plus years of well-detailed near-death experiences cataloged and written about, and you're going to find the same thing. I mean, this is confirming an experience which is not material and it's not physical. It's mental at the very least, but at the greatest, it's purely spiritual in every way, shape, and form. And I think the ninjutsu style Togakuri-ryu, which I studied, taught a triangle of life, which was really to achieve balance between, in the lower left corner, you're born into the material or the body. The lower right quarter is the mental or the intellectual, right? But unless those two grow to the capstone of spirituality, neither one will be in balance with the other. And so growing into the balance of the spiritual nature of oneself is really, again, what is the two? Physical, mental, right? But connecting them both together is the spiritual. So the spiritual use of the body and the brain which the Russells distinguish the brain is not the mind thinks through the brain. That's where your electric impulses come from, is this field of mind, which is omnipresent. And that's how that explains telepathy. It explains so many other things. Again, all this can be summarized into a very experiential and confirmational knowledge, which is yet to emerge on this planet. And that's the knowledge of our own divinity, which also elucidates our purpose. It gives us our meaning in life. It gives us many things. And it's not taught anywhere, excepting one university that I know of, which I was fortunate enough to be president of. That's University of Science and Philosophy.
Yeah, it's a definitely profound realizations when you go through that work, and it just kind of sets you up in such a nice way. They kind of take you through it. And yeah, like you said, a lot of other people are doing it now, and people are doing it in their different ways. Lao Tzu, even like Walter's, like the anode and cathode with like the biconvex lens. Like, as when I was looking at that, I was trying to figure out the science behind all this stuff, and I'm looking at it, and here's the seed of life sitting right in front of me, right? Which every ancient culture has.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely amazing, right? Just getting that science to back up that spiritual philosophy too, which is kind of what they did.
Yeah. And I like to say, over many interviews I've said this, but Dr. Russell three-dimensionalized alchemy. He took alchemy into 3 dimensions, something that was limited to the circle and the square became the cube and the sphere, and it opened up into a completely new understanding of the ways, nature's ways and processes, and how it builds bodies and destroys bodies. So very interesting stuff. I mean, behoove anybody to get into it a little more. And I would visit philosophy.org, because it's the only organization that directly supports and is the brainchild of both Walter and Leo Russell. And get some books there. Start with a book that you find interesting, and you're supporting that foundation and the continuation of the dissemination of this knowledge to the world, which is a good thing,
Support. Yeah. And I found the home study course, because it kind of took you from like when I was reading The Secret of Light, the science, I'm like, oh, I just don't have quite a foundation for this. But when you get into that home study course, they really take you through all of it. And it just made the science is the part that I had the trouble with. The philosophy and the spiritual aspects, I sort of had set myself up previously to understand those things, but the science was really what became illuminated to me by that.
I was the same way, Luke. It took me a couple years to unlearn all the quantum jargon that I had in my head, from what the bleep to, studying the Einstein and the this and the that and the, I realized over time, that ultimately that 2 years of unlearning was really the hard part. Not learning something new, but unlearning what you had previously thought was true. At least, that takes work. But yeah, the home study course is imperative in my opinion. But to add to the home study course, the 13th unit, which the home study course has 12, the 13th unit was meant to be a new concept of the universe. And that is really an incredible look. It's the one I always, if there's any scientists out there who want to get a crash course into the science itself without the philosophy, so to speak, that's the book to get. A New Concept of the Universe was written more for the scientific mind set in man than even the home study course. But both are very good. But just as a historical footnote, A New Concept of the Universe was actually written to be the 13th unit of the home study course.
Cool. Yeah.
They kept it separate because it was too large of a volume.
Right on. Yeah, that was part of one of my recent orders from the university. So that's awesome to know.
Yep.
And get more into the science.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do one more slide here,
Sure.
buddy? I know you love this one. This is one of my favorite quotes from Russell as well. The two-way universe. The two directions of thinking are the outward direction towards your material equipment, which gives you your resources, and then the inward direction towards your mental equipment, which gives you your resourcefulness. Mediocrity is due to thinking only in one direction. Materialists think only in the outward direction towards material, and impractical dreamers think only in the inward direction towards the seat of imagination. While the creative genius thinks in both directions and balances his thought before he acts with the wisdom obtained from his two-directional thinking. Whew.
That's a mind blower right there. I remember when I read that, I believe it came from Think, the IBM lectures book.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote that whole quote out, typed it out, because I'm like, man, this is pure power. Because I could identify myself being a musician and a writer and I've written over 400 songs, and I remember the times where I was thinking inwardly toward the creative, right? That creative seed of spark of imagination to the seed of imagination. But then I would immediately have to bring that out and play it on the piano or play it on the bass or the drums or the guitar. So it was the use of both directions of that thinking, which allows a person to create more proficiently than someone who thinks in just one direction or the other all the time. And again, the hedonist is an outward thinking person. That's what they get. They want to satisfy and quench the desires of the senses, right? So you get these cults, you get these world forums, these Davoses, right? And there's really not anything there for the imaginative seat of the soul to really gain benefit from. It's just the outward looking over the whole world as if they run and control the whole thing. That explains the psychopathy in very simple terms, one direction or the other. Now it's interesting, he says you can be just as unproductive if all you do is, or if all you are is a daydreamer, constantly thinking inwardly, but never doing anything to balance that inward thought with productive action. And again, when I read this, I knew this is golden, this is beautiful here, because he's explaining how the genius is able to become a genius and overcome his own self-imposed sentence of mediocrity, which really everybody born, there's very few who become geniuses in a very early stage, right? I mean, some just start right at 1 year old, 2 years old, and it's not even arguable they're a genius. You know it at a very early age, but many people in their stage of becoming genius wake up later in life. But eventually what it takes is that balancing of the inward and the outward directions of thought, and that's a beautiful way to put it. Just doesn't get any better than that, because it's so plain Jane and right to the point. Yeah. Too much of one or too much of the other results in a bunch of nothing. Yeah. But the balance of both and the carrying out of the seat of imagination to the seat of existence is a very balanced rhythmic interchange. Again, balance, right? That's the key to creativity of a massive scale.
Well, one of my practices, like I carry like a pen and paper around with me everywhere at work. Like I'll stop what I'm doing and I have to start writing things down, because if I don't get it down in physical form, then that thought is gone, right? And so one of my practices, that's why some of the stuff I write, I'm like, did I even write this? Because it's like I'm coming from that, what is like a stream of consciousness, and then I'm just putting it down where it's like, and then I can go back to it and refine it and build a better body for it later. But if I don't get that initial thing down in physical form, it's like it's gone in the ether somewhere, right?
Sure. So I can't tell you how many great songs I wrote that, from improvs, we'd be 3 or 4 of us, 3 pieces, 4-piece bands, and we didn't record it. Guess what happened to it? Gone forever.
Right.
But I think probably the best stuff I ever wrote, which was improv in a lot of ways, could have been created and refined into a progressive song of sorts, just disappeared forever because I didn't hit record on that damn tape deck.
Right. Yeah.
But, there's that balance too. Sometimes the joy is more than the product,
Yeah.
and that you're taking part in something extremely creative and extremely improvisational, which nature is one continual improvisation. That's the beauty of it.
Well, and it would be a shame if you hadn't already created so much. If that was the only song you've done and the only thing you created, then it's gone, right? But that you
Sure.
already have such a foundation of things you've created. Going even through my notes of stuff that I was writing down, that your quotes and things from other shows, it's like on one of the pages is like this big poem. I was like, I'm reading it and I don't remember even writing it. And it's only probably a month ago, but it's because it comes to you and I just get it down. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm just streaming it out. And then, when you come back to it later, you're like, holy, what is this? I don't even remember doing this, because it's just that inspiration that you got right down there, and you just got to
Yeah,
put
and
it out.
that's a great key, what you're saying there. I mean, write it down. We have 60 to 80,000 human thoughts a day, according to the latest science. But which one are you going to remember? Which one are you going to build a body for? So,
Well, and this woman, Julia Cameron, the Right to Write, she talks about every morning just doing stream of consciousness writing every morning, and it's like you're dialoguing with that still small voice within you, right? You're dialoguing with that soul,
yep.
giving a voice to your soul, and then that helps you be balanced as well, right? When you're not giving that voice to the soul, there's like this inner angst inside of you. There's something inside of you, right? It's not being appreciated, and it's not getting that platform in a way, right? And when you do that, it's like my friend Martin, he calls it priming the pump, right? You're priming that pump for that imagination and that just unique voice to come out of you, right? And if you don't do it, it's like any other thing. It's like a muscle that becomes atrophied.
Right. And that's a form of aesthetics. And you just made me think of a profound point about philosophy. Why do we entrench ourselves in the study of these branches when they're really meant to be lived?
Yeah.
If we don't have an aesthetic relation, a relationship of recognizing beauty, creating beauty with our own soul, the branches of philosophy are not meant to be studied or expertised. They're meant to be employed, utilized, and integrated into our actual existence. So what you're doing by dialoguing with the universal soul, your soul is holding a conference with the universal soul, as the Russells would say, then you're communing with the Holy One, and you're bringing out those peak emanation, seed of imagination moments and putting them down into words. You go back and look at it later and you're like, I wrote this.
Yeah.
You're going to find that commonality with a lot of people who also do the same, because they're as surprised as can be, like, oh my God, this is incredible. But that also gives you a bit of self-esteem. It gives you some self-value. You live the ethical life, don't just study it. You live a encompass moral qualities and virtuous states of being into your life, and you all part of transcending the mundane is another alchemical term, but to really, and that's why you always see in alchemy, you see the square and the circle, and then you see the unification of the two. That's what alchemy really truly is unifying the polarization of the world and being able to see it through thine eye be single, right? So in other words, you're commanding the hemispheric and the dualistic nature of reality to serve the divine soul as it's connecting to the universal soul and giving you the endless supply of creativity, which allows you to master and navigate this very real dualistic world we find ourselves in, but as a whole being, because nobody can master the fulcrum from either end of the seesaw, but the fulcrum can master the seesaw, and it doesn't need not take an end of either one to do so.
Nice. Awesome. Well, and I love the aesthetics being at the top of the 5 branches of philosophy. Michael Tessarian said that we should flip the 5 pillars of philosophy upside down and have aesthetics at the top, beauty, and then morality and ethics, right? And if we did that, what would these sciences be creating rather than metaphysics and epistemology and all this other stuff? If we came from a point of beauty and morality, then all those others would fall into their rightful place, I think. And we wouldn't be living in.
The branches of philosophy are just more subdivisions of the human mind. I mean, I would say make it into a wheel, a sphere, and each one's a continent, but all part of the world of man's mind, which he should utilize all parts of the world. What happens when the Ukraine war starts and there's no fertilizer? What happens to the rest of the world? It starves. So if let's say in terms of a landmass, you could put, this may be a bad example, but you could put aesthetics at Ukraine, and if you starve the world of aesthetics, the world starves with it. So think of it as spherical. It's the being of life itself, the greatest shape in the universe, the shape of preferred choice is the sphere for existence, and the invisible scaffolding behind the sphere is the cube, and that's the non-sensible, the unsensible form. So all your interactions in Russell science are between this omnipresent cube nature of mind, which cubes exist in and through themselves throughout the totalitarian matter of all through the cubes exist throughout the totality of mind, and they're nestled within one another. And anywhere there's a sphere, there is a cube surrounding it much larger than the sphere itself. The wave field of the cube and its boundaries are always hugely larger than the sphere that is the result of the interchange between both through wave dynamics. You don't need particles in a wave universe, and it's really a mind wave universe, and mind makes it what it is, whether it's a chemical element or whether it's a Picasso painting or a Michelangelo sculpture. So, the power of the mind really is the most underrated of all the studies, but it's really the one question mark that if man could answer, he could lift himself out of this self-made hellhole of intellectual and mindful poverty that he's created for himself through ignorance, and could be something that helps build an enduring civilization that has continuity like nature, and that's the real lesson for us. And that's why the Russells, they kept putting this forth that, we don't have to suffer civilizational collapse if we teach the kinds of principles that keep nature in a state of continuity. We can quit shooting ourselves in the foot, but we have to teach the right kind of science and the right kind of philosophy in order to bring that balance to humanity.
I mean, and that's how we know everything we've been taught is a lie. That old Lloyd Pye saying, right? Everything you think you know is a lie, because we see the results of it. We wouldn't see unbalance. We wouldn't see all this stupid shit going on.
Exactly.
I mean, you can fit 100 Ukraines in the state of Texas.
Right.
Why is all the fertilizer there? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, and vertical farming is another aggregate that you could introduce to the world that's going to be one of the future saving graces, because what are all the companies like Bill Gates investing in are all vertical farming methods, because they're so efficient. But this is what they're going to use to grow all their Frankenstein crops to poison us with their, genetically engineered vaccine ingredient, vaccine ready lettuce and all this garbage. We're going to survive. And they aim, the aim of all this is to cull the human herd, to lower the numbers. And, this is the problem with these people. They don't have any regard for human life other than their own, but they're very human. Let me tell you what, they're not interdimensional entities. I like the line from, well, I'm not going to say that here. I don't want to get you kicked off of YouTube, but
fine.
I'll just say this, that there's a form of justice that's divine, and it has not even begun to introduce itself to the world of man, but it is, and it is coming, and it's not going to be just one big moment. It's going to be a series of little things that eventually free man. And it's going to be because man, again, necessitates himself into the picture and does away with this idea that AI and the externalisms of the world are more powerful than his own mind. Self-liberation is what we need.
Yeah, well, Ayn Rand has a line where she says, like, man isn't a means to an end. Man is an end in himself. That's the whole thing. We're here to express ourselves. We're not like a means to an end of something else. We are the end in ourselves, the beginning and the end.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
she sees the timelessness in man and the divine quality, even though she might not call it that. I believe she might have even been an atheist, but she still noticed things that are in parallel with some of the most divine minds that have ever walked the earth and have written, unparalleled writings. But there's these crossovers again, these golden threads that interweave. And the great thinkers who have done the alone time of thinking in their own minds, thinking things out, way out, as far as you can think them, and then back again. It's 90% of knowledge doesn't come from reading. It comes from contemplating what you've read. That's where knowledge comes from, because you're awakening to the light within you, which is what the symbols called words represent to the writer who authored them for you to read. So really the great author would say, don't read my words, understand what I'm trying to tell you that is wordless. And that's where you really cross the line from just parrot to thinker to knower, right? I know, therefore I am. That's my update to that old axiom.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, maybe we should leave it here for today, Matt, and let you get on with the rest of your day. Do you have anything else to say before we go, or just shut her down here?
I think it's great. It's been a great discussion, and we'll just keep moving through, take our time with this. There's no rush. It's great to be able to expound upon a lot of these points that an otherwise 1 or 2 hour podcast that only happens once. It's almost near impossible to get this kind of stuff out to where it can really sink in and help people. But ultimately, the great power of the mind is yours to discover and to utilize, to uncover and to implement, to integrate, and to put into action, as it were, to pump it out and put it into motion.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that you came on and that I can give you this space to sort of expand on these ideas. Yeah, because I do feel like, if you just do one here and there, it's too rushed. There's not enough time to get through it all. And we only did like 2 slides today.
Right.
So, and because there's just like, once we get going, there's so much to talk about and to sort of, just expand upon. So I'm really happy that you're enjoying this, and we'll just keep going as long as we're able.
Sounds good. And I'll just share a couple websites real quick, but anybody interested in learning more about the Russell philosophy and science, www.philosophy.org, and click on store and support a great cause, which preserves the Russell legacy. And then my personal website is mattpresti.com. And you might want to share your Rumble channel too, in case,
I do. Yeah. I put all the links below in every description of every episode. So hopefully people, sometimes my descriptions are a little long, but if they go down, all the links will be there to your site and university and my Rumble channel in case we get kicked off for.
That's why I brought that up, because you never know. I mean,
you never know
these days.
Yeah, and I don't want you to censor yourself at all. If I get kicked off of YouTube, who cares? That's just, let's not worry about that. Let's not worry about the AI bots and whatever.
At the same time, I do have to disclaim that I only speak for myself in this, not any, I don't speak on behalf of any of the organizations that I've worked with in the past or continue to work with today. But really, I am the kid that does his own thing to myself. One of these kids was doing his own thing, and that's called being true to thyself. And there's nothing better, no greater reward than to live true to the dictates of one's own conscience. Great to join you again, Luke.
Awesome. Can't wait to do it again. I hope everyone enjoys this. And until next time, see you,
Cheers.
everybody.